Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yep, very, very much appreciated. I know there's a lot of you out there that enjoy the rum episodes of the show, and I obviously enjoy doing them as well. It's as you well know, it's the Good Dram Show. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be wholly about whiskey. There are numerous other spirits out and about, but obviously I don't tend to sort of do gin episodes of the show anymore because nobody watches them and nobody buys the bloody stuff as far as I'm concerned nowadays. Anyway, as I mentioned last week, I had this episode of the show already in planning, in waiting to go. I fancied doing a bit of a left field whiskey episode of the show. My God, I've got some weird ones today. Yes, they're all European whiskies. Oh yeah, this is going to be fun. And a couple of them are eye-wateringly alcoholic. And the things I talk to my liver for you guys, don't I? At the end of the day. Anyway, I'm a big boy, I can deal with it. So yes, this week's episode of the show, all the samples that I'm looking at were entered into the 2022 and 2023 World Whisky Awards. I used to love getting the European whiskies. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that really hated doing them because I just couldn't deal with them. I just sort of love to see what weird and wonderful stuff was sort of lurking outside the boundaries of this island. So there's some really interesting stuff. So as I've got 5 distilleries that you've probably never heard of, because I certainly bloody well hadn't until I actually did these tastings. There's a lot of information to sort of get through, so I'm going to keep the sort of the jocular waffle to a minimum, and I'll let you know about some of these distilleries. So in no particular order, I think actually yes, there are in a particular order. The order I'm tasting them. Right. So the first one distillery I'm going to be looking at is called Il Mulino de... Oh yeah, look, it's going to be a lot of foreign words, okay? You're going to sort of I'm going to crucify some of them. You know I am, so please no comments about my dodgy pronunciation, otherwise I will delete them. Anyway, so the distillery is an Italian distillery called Il Mulino de Sassello, which I believe means the mill of Sassello. And I think from looking at the pictures, now the problem is that sort of they've got a lovely website, lots of stuff you can sort of download, loads of pictures. Trouble is, it's all in Italian. I haven't got a clue what the hell it was all about. Even Google Translate wouldn't help me out here. So I know practically nothing about the distillery apart from what I can see. And it appears to me that part of the distillery, probably the bit where they do the sort of the distilling and what have you, is a fairly modern looking building, nondescript with the big, I think it just says distillery along the side of it, which is fine. The other bit, which I think is where the mill comes in, is the mill. Looks like a really old building, water wheel, and the from the pictures it looks pretty arcane, it has to be said. So I don't know anything about the distillery itself. I can't tell you when it was built or anything like that, apart from there was an article on the press part of the website about the World Whisky Awards, that 2023 and 2024, because they basically won Italian new make, or best Italian new make. And you're probably saying, well, that's not difficult to do because it was probably the only Italian new make that was entered, and you're probably right, because I only know of one other Italian distillery. But anyway, apparently their philosophy appears to be sort of done on site. What's that horrendous term? Field to glass or some sort of god awful thing like that. But apparently all the cereal they use is grown on their own land. They use the family mill to mill it. They use water from the Ligurian mountains. They distill it. They probably age it there. Well, actually, they don't age it very much because, as far as I'm aware, I don't know whether they do whiskey or not. It's called Moonshine. So that gives you a bit of a clue. But we'll talk about the actual product when I get to introduce the range. But anyway, so this article was alleged to be had a quote from somebody called Diego Asodrini. Don't know whether he's the owner or the distiller, or maybe both, but he's obviously the main man with regards to the distillery, which is called Il Mulino di Sassello, or the Mill of Sassello. The second distillery we're looking at, now we're getting to some weird and wonderful Scandinavian distilleries. I love the weird and wonderful Scandinavian distilleries. Some of their stuff is practically untastable, but there you go, we'll get around to that in a minute. So this is called the Søgaards Distillery. It was, now I can actually tell you something about that because their website is all in English. So it's founded in 2018 in Aalborg. And it's a distillery, a brewery, and apparently a beer hall. Now, it seems to me that they have quite a taking on the whole terroir concept, which seems to be very in at the moment, as you well know. So they have specific farmers that grow their barley, and from the islands around sort of where the distillery is. Production began in 2019 when they obviously sort of took the barley from these different islands, different farmers, and basically produced spirit from the individual barley. That was then aged for 3 years at the distillery in ex-Jack Daniels barrels before. Now here's the interesting bit, the clever bit, is that then it's then shipped back out to the island where it came from, or where the barley came from, and it's matured for another couple of years on the island. So the initial maturation takes place in like I said, ex-Jack Daniels barrels. Then after 3 years it's then sort of effectively finished, for want of a better word I suppose, into 30 litre casks, and then these, like I said, these are then shipped out to the specific islands, or you can apparently buy them from the distillery. And I believe there's 3 different bottlings in their range. Now weirdly enough, the 2 that I'm looking at today, they entered for the competition, don't appear on the website. It just does not exist. I cannot find out any information about those bottles whatsoever, but we'll obviously come to those in due course. The second of the 2 Danish distilleries I'll be looking at is called Thai, or Tier possibly, I think it might be Thy, might be pronounced Tier, I don't know. But anyway, this is apparently a distillery in Denmark, and I don't actually have, I can't exactly say where it was. I failed to write that bit down. But apparently it's a family-owned distillery, run by, or was originally run by Nikolai Nikoladsson, who was a 7th generation distiller, I believe. And their first whiskey was produced in 2010. They bought in mash from the Peated brewery, and malt came from Germany apparently. It's a bit of a strange thing, really. Sure, there's breweries in Denmark they could use, but no, apparently all come from Germany. So their first cask was released, and they appeared to, and I don't, again, this is all sketchy information because I don't know for definite, they appeared to do single cask bottlings. So their first bottling was called bottling number 1. Yeah, okay, obvious, called Cran Kilt. No, I haven't got a clue what the hell that means, but anyway, that was their first bottling. Since then, since 2014, they've apparently expanded the distillery. They have a new warehouse. They actually have built a brewery, a malt house, and so on and so forth. They've invested a fair amount of money in the distillery, and I can't remember which bottling they're up to now, but when I find those notes I will tell you. The next distillery is, we're sticking with the whole Scandinavian theme, is called the Aurora Spirit Distillery, that is in Norway. Apparently it's located at the Lyngen Resort, which is close to the Alps apparently. So again, another distillery that has been in production not very long. I think they started production in October of 2016. That was their first distillation, which was filled straight into casks that had probably been pre-bought by private investors. And then in the Christmas of 2016 they started commercial distilling. So they used water from the glacial, melted glacial waters, which is actually not anything new, because there was another distillery, and I forget the name of that distillery, that actually went and sort of like, you know, got bits of glacier. I mean, wow. I don't think they go and nab bits of glacier. They probably spring water, I would imagine. Their wash comes from a local brewery called the Mac Brewery, who their head distiller, I'm now going to murder his name, Gudmund Stinsrud, who's apparently used to be head brewer there, and now is obviously head distiller at the Aurora Spirits Distillery, so kind of ties in. So they tend to use sort of a number of different types of casks. They use all manner of different sized American oaks, from 40 to 250 litres. They use Spanish sherry and so on and so forth. They also use a bit of wine, sauternes, Madeira, rum and wine casks. Now the interesting thing is that sort of their warehouses are apparently ex-World War II and NATO bunkers. Yeah, wonderful stuff. Huh? It's nothing like a bit of sort of like, reuse, shall we say. It's all very organic, isn't it? But apparently these bunkers are pretty good at sort of retaining sort of a constant temperature in it. But it does fluctuate between 2 and 15 degrees. But apparently it's the in thing to do when you're sort of like running a Scandinavian distillery, is use old bunkers to store your casks in, and why not? Now apparently the whiskey that I'm looking at is called Bivrost, for those of you that know your Nordic history and stuff, so on and so forth. This was an ancient Norse word for the road that led between sort of like the sort of like the Nordic afterlife and the sort of current world. So they kind of play a little bit on their Viking heritage. I mean, you can't blame them, I suppose, at the end of the day, but I don't think they go the sort of like the full kind of Highland Park esque kind of stuff. It's all quite, well, I'd say relatively subtle if you looked at the label for that. I mean, interesting, shall we say. And the final distillery we're looking at is actually from Slovenia. Yeah, indeed, they do indeed make whiskey, although they make spirit in Slovenia. I have tasted some of it, and it was interesting. So this is called the Broken Bones Distillery. Again, another craft distillery. I hate that term, but you know, family owned, all that kind of stuff. Founded by 3 friends, I believe, and here we go again. I'm going to murder some names. A chap called Bostian Marukic, who apparently was a computer scientist. Well, why not? You know. And apparently a serial entrepreneur who had a passion for wine and spirits and what have you, and I believe got into winemaking when he married into a family winemakers, but he's since learnt about brewing and so forth, and apparently is now the head distiller. No, he's not the head distiller. The next chap is the head distiller, Borat. I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce his surname. I can't pronounce it. But anyway, apparently he's a professor of philosophy. Don't know what he's going to make of this episode of the show then. But apparently, again, he was a whiskey aficionado, has been since the 90s, apparently, and was the first company, or ran the first company, to import whiskey into Slovenia after they gained independence in 1991. And the final person involved in the distillery is a lady called Polona Preskara, who graduated in marketing and was originally in the pharmaceutical industry, so probably got tired of drugs, I imagine, I don't know. But anyway, she also sort of, I think her family owned a vineyard or winemakers or something like that. But anyway, she, I imagine, does all the marketing and what have you. Now, the interesting thing is the name. Apparently, the name came to be because both in July of 2016, both Borat and Bostian ended up in hospital. One apparently broke his leg and the other broke his nose, and they thought, that's a great name to call a whiskey distillery, the Broken Bones Distillery. So there you have it. I mean, you know, obviously there's going to be links in the below the episode on YouTube, so you can go and have a look at these websites. And I've now spoken so much, my mouth is really dry, so I'm going to speak a bit more because I'm going to introduce today's lineup before I can actually taste anything. So let's do that. Right, okay, so the first bottling we'll be looking at is from the Il Mulino de Sassello distillery. This is called Il Signor Camillo's Moonshine, Italiano de Monte Liguri. Wow, that's a hell of a mouthful. Apparently it is made from 100% corn, and I think that's all they do. They do some aged corn, I believe, but this is bottled at 40% and comes in one quite a cool sort of old-fashioned Grolsch kind of bottle, is what it appears to be, so kind of quite looking forward to tasting that. As I said, the next two come from the Søgaards distillery. These are, well, I don't know what the hell they are, because like I said, these two whiskies do not seem to appear on their website. There is no mention of them anywhere on the internet. Even the picture of the bottle that's on the World Whisky Awards website doesn't seem to be true. I've used it for the title page, but it appears to be exactly the same label as one of the other bottlings. So what we have here is, it's called the Kloster Stygge Krumpen A and Kloster Stygge Krumpen B, both bottled at 71%. Jesus Christ. These are single cask bottlings, and like I said, I can't tell you anything about them apart from this chap Stygge Krumpen was apparently a Danish clergyman and bureaucrat who was the secretary to King Christian II of Denmark and the last Catholic bishop of the Diocese of Borglum, from 1533 to 1536. So don't know whether he had anything to do with making of whiskey or whatever, or whether he actually liked to drink it or not. I have no idea, but there you go. That is, well, it's just going to be interesting. And like I said, I haven't got a clue what the hell it is, so it could be anything, you know. Anyway, moving on to the next bottling. This is, like I said, from the Tier Whisky. So this is a single cask bottling. It is basically, now, and what I do like about the distillery is, again, that they're really into sort of giving you all the information about their whiskey. So it's been produced by using organic evergreen and Pepino barley. They've used pale and caramel malt. It's been aged, well, they didn't go into sort of detail about cut points and all that kind of stuff, but it's been aged for 5 years in a first fill PX butt, and as you can see from the colour, quite strongly coloured, so we'll be interested to see whether there's any distillery character there or not. The next bottling, like I said, is from the Aurora Spirit Distillery. This is called, here we go again, more foreign words, Bivrost Muspelheim Arctic Single Malt, bottled at 46%. It's made from peated barley, fermented, like I said, it's made with glacial melt water and it's matured in both bourbon and ex-Islay casks. Now, I don't think there's any sheep poo was used in the peating of that particular whiskey, but who knows? You Scandinavians are a mad lot. You could probably done it anyway without telling us. Anyway, and the final bottling is obviously the Broken Bones 3-year-old Peated Slovenian whiskey, another big mouthful, again bottled at 46%. Small batch bottling, I believe, aged for approximately 37 months, I believe. So looking forward to finishing with a little bit of peat. So, oh my God, now I've got through all of that. I hope you haven't fallen asleep or disappeared off and, you know, just, or skipped it. Please don't skip it. This is all, I think, quite interesting information. Anyway, let's taste some whiskey. Right, okay, so finally, this is the Il Signor Camillo Moonshine. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? It's a bit raw. It's got some pleasant sweet corn, apricot. There's a little floral note there. There's a little marzipan. There's a little bit of white fruit. It's young. It's not kind of rip your face off raw. I mean, this is obviously why they've cut it to 40%. I imagine, you know, if this was as it came straight off the still, probably somewhere around about 60%, it would be a lot more fainty and a little bit more rougher, shall we say. But it goes to show that they're actually producing what appears to be a really nice, clean new make. Let's see what the parts on. Right, a lot more new make character on the palate. A little more of that off the stilly kind of notes, sub-fainty notes. Again, it's got some nice fleshy corn notes. Well, it's more cereal than corn, actually. I mean, when I remember tasting this blind, I didn't know obviously what the hell it was, and it does taste more cereal than corn, or more cereal than kind of fat American corn, I should say. Maybe it's sort of slim Italian corn, possibly. It's got some nice fruit to it, some white fruit, although it's very subtle. It's a bit on the short side. It's pleasant, it's clean, well, bar the little bit of faintiness which you would expect with new make. And to be bluntly honest with it, I like a little bit of sort of rawness there in my new make, and you know, and it's not too much of it. Which is a nice thing. It's not like it's kind of like, you know, literally, you know, turn the tap on the sill and stick it in a bottle kind of thing, which I suspect it would have been if it was full strength. But I would like to try that at full strength actually, because it would be interesting to see. But I think as a product on its own, yeah. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Borglum Kloster Stygge Krumpen A. I don't know whether I mean, they both look like they've been aged in American oak or the same oak. I don't know whether there's any difference between the terroir or anything like that. We'll see anyway if there's any sort of real difference in the whiskies themselves. Okay, there's a rawness there, I will give you that, but there's some soft, creamy white fruits. It's got quite a graininess to it. It's almost kind of grain-like. Maybe this isn't distilled with barley, maybe they're using other types of grain. There's a little citrus, a little sultana. It's also a little earthiness, a little ashiness possibly. Okay, it's young, it's not, it doesn't scream 71% either. It's kind of remarkably well behaved for something with this kind of level of alcohol. And yet, it's young. Let's see what passes on. Yeah, you can taste that 70-odd%, but again, it's actually quite well contained. I will give it that. Yes, it's shortened the finish quite considerably. And does bitter quite a bit on the finish, and it's not oak bitterness. It's pretty much alcohol bitterness. Again, it's got some graininess to it. There's some white fruits. There's some apricot. A bit of a stringent gooseberry sort of, yeah, green fruit kind of note comes through on the mid palate, and then it all kind of stops. And it's okay. It's interesting. It obviously tastes very young. I mean, I wouldn't have put that much beyond 5 possibly, and it doesn't really have a huge amount of complexity. It's kind of dampened everything down a little bit. The water it's got probably brought out the natural oils, which has kind of just flattened it a little bit. A little bit more oak possibly, a little bit more vanilla, touch more citrus maybe. Again, it's okay. It's not too bad, but it does lack some complexity. Let's see what the pass on now. Palate likewise, it's all a bit, well, it's harmonious, I'll give it that, but nothing really stands out. It's pleasant, it's okay, it's got some barley character, it's got a bit of fruit, it's all nice at the end of the day, but it's really doesn't kind of like sort of, it doesn't really stand out, that's the thing. It's just a nice whiskey. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Stygge Krumpen B. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, well, that's got more intensity. It's kind of like they've turned the volume up a little bit. Again, it's got that graininess, but I'm getting more fruit, more green apple, more apricot. It's got I'm almost smelling the sort of tannins of the wood tannins, although it's not very oaky, it's not very vanillad. Underripe fruit cereal. It is very much like A, but just a little bit more intense. So I don't know what they've done differently, is the honest answer. It does have, like I said, it does have a similarity. Maybe a change of cut points, possibly, but I don't get any sort of faintiness or any overt sort of like anything like that. So I don't know is the honest answer. Let's just see what the buzz like. And again, quite raw, intense, a lot more masked, possibly younger, maybe. Maybe this was a different terroir here. I don't know. I don't get this. I don't get a difference in as sort of obvious as, say, something like I did with the Waterford bottlings. There's a very much a kind of a base character here. It just feels more intense. And like I said, I don't know whether it's different cut points. There's a little bit more fruit, more intensity. Maybe it's younger. It's certainly more alcoholic, although it's still 71% the same ABV, but it just tastes more alcoholic. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Again, it's softened everything. More cereal. It's just, I think it's just too young, really. I mean, it's perfectly okay for drinking, but it just really doesn't seem to have developed an awful lot of anything. Yes, it's pleasant. It's got some barley. There's a bit of oak. And I imagine if this was exported to the UK, it would probably be horribly expensive, as a lot of these European whiskies have a tendency to be. And yeah, interesting, but is it really worth it? I don't know. Anyway, let's see what passes like. Yeah, again, oilier, a lot more oilier, more intensity of oils, but less anything else, to be bluntly honest with you. So it does feel like maybe the cut points are slightly different on this particular bottling. If I was going to sort of say that was the reason between the difference, I would say this has possibly had a later cut, a later sort of like a cut into the heart, and probably a slightly later cut into the tails. Yeah, it's okay at the end of the day. Right, okay, so let's move on to the tier whiskey. So this is number 19. I don't know if I said that at the beginning. Anyway, so it's number 19, PX cask, 59.1%. Let's see what nose good says. Oh, it's quite fusel. Oh, yeah, that's got a rawness to it. Fusel kind of dusty rye spice, herbal sherry, tangerine oil, treacle, sulphur. Oh, yeah, I think it's spirit sulphur more than cask sulphur. It really is young. I mean, God almighty. There's a sort of, it's just a rawness there. I mean, it's kind of, you know, I know the Scandinavians are all a bit of a weird bunch. I mean, you know, you would be too if you spent half the year in total darkness. Maybe that's why they drink this stuff. It's kind of, maybe it helps their eyesight. I don't know. Anyway, I mean, it's bloody raw. It really is. Raw sherry, raw spirit. It's entertaining in a kind of like, you know, sadomasochistic kind of manner, I suppose. Anyway, and would you believe it, this actually won a gold medal at the 2023 World Whisky Awards in the single cask category. I'll leave you to figure that one out. Anyway, let's see what the pass like. Yeah, that's chewy, that's raw, that's kind of PX sherry. Actually, it's more kind of, there's not so much, there is some treacle there, but it's not as sweet as you would expect, and I'm guessing that's probably the alcohol that's kind of keeping the sweetness in tech. So it's a raisinated dried fruits, treacle, a little bit of sulphur, not so much as what was on the nose. I'm not really getting a great deal of spirit character at all. It's pretty much all about the sherry. It's not really telling me an awful lot on the palate, which is a bit of an unfortunate thing, because I thought the nose actually was kind of at least kind of intimating at what the character of the spirit that the distillery was producing, but unfortunately the palate does seem to be all about the sherry. Let's see if water kind of like mitigates some of the sherry. Not really, it's kind of brought it out, it's brought out more of the sulphur as well. That green sort of sulphur, green sherried fruit. I'm wondering if it is actually the cask now, not spirit sulphur. It's a bit of a shame, but then some of you probably wouldn't have picked up on it, but as you know, I have a bit of a kind of like a tendency to pick up on sulphur quite easily. It's a sherry monster at the end of the day, which is a bit unfortunate. I mean, I'd love to taste sort of the spirit out of American oak, so maybe if somebody from the distillery is watching and wants to send me in the sample, then that would be cool. Let's see what that's like now. It's a little bit homogeneous now, it has to be said. Again, all sherry. There's still some off notes there, but then the off notes are not quite so noticeable. It's okay at the end of the day. I think it's just maybe a bad cask, possibly, or you know, maybe a slightly sort of like, you know, like I said, a bit of a sulphur tainted cask. Difficult to say what the character of the spirit was like because of all of the PX character. So it's kind of really difficult to kind of pass judgment on what that actual distillery is. But the judgment on this particular whiskey is that I don't think it was really that great. Like I said, it was compromised by some cask sulphur, unfortunately. But yeah, they're still around, these sulphured bloody sherry casks. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Bivrost Arctic Single Malt. I won't say, oh go on, I will. Bivrost Muspelheim. I don't know. I don't talk Viking. I might have Viking heritage somewhere along in my DNA, but I certainly don't talk Viking. So, but anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Peat, and lots of it. Earthy, raw, dung. Yeah. Sheep poo. Oh, I like this. I know, I love this kind of weird stuff. There's a bit of apricot, there's some cereal. It's, what am I gonna, it's a bit Lafroig-y, but it doesn't quite have the sort of medicinal notes of Lafroig. It's a bit, I suppose I could say it's a bit Kalila. It's a bit of a kind of cop-out, isn't it? Yeah, it's a peated malt. They all taste like bloody Kalila, or smell like Kalila. But it does have that slight sort of Kalila intensity, but it's only 46%, but ooh, that has some really lovely peaty intensity. Lots of sheep poo, lots of dung, lots of natural, it's a really all natural character. I do love it, it has to be said. There's a little bit of a creaminess there. I'm not getting, again, a great deal of spirit character, and it's, I suppose, part of the problem when you don't know what the distillery character is like because you've not tasted their unpeated spirit. It's difficult to pick it out. There is a little bit of barley there. There's a little bit of sweet apricot. It's got some nice fleshiness beneath all the peat. It's not a total peat monster. There is something there as well. But anyway, let's see what the pal's like. Oh, it's got an astringent green pepper finish, that kind of, ooh, that sort of makes you, yeah, sort of close up and go, ooh. I'd love to have seen that at cask strength. I mean, if that makes you go at 46%, imagine what it would do at sort of 60-odd%. It's pretty much like the nose it implies. It's kind of quite raw. There's that sort of earthy, dungy, not a sheep pooey on the palate, it has to be said, but it has that sort of like natural characteristic on the palate. Like I said, green pepper. It's young, it's intense. There's not a great deal other than the peat, but it's lovely for what it is, it has to be said. It certainly wakes up the senses. It's certainly a kind of like a poke in the with a sharp stick. But it's not that complex at the end of the day. But again, the problem is, of course, because it's Scandinavian, by the time it gets over here into the UK, it's just horribly expensive, which is always the problem with these European whiskies. And I often find that sort of the retail price really doesn't kind of match the level of complexity within the spirit. That they have this, kind of weirdness, this or kind of like, ooh, wow kind of thing. But then you go and look at it and go, is the spirit really worth 70 or 80 quid? Anyway. So, on to the final whisky of the afternoon. This is the Broken Bones 3-year-old Slovenian whisky. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That's quite interesting. It's very, very foresty. And I remember I can't remember the name of the other Slovenian whisky that I tasted many years ago. That kind of had that sort of foresty kind of character as well. So I'm getting green wood, herbal peppercorn, barley, not heavily peated. There's a nice level of peatiness. It's actually quite savoury. It's got a bit of astringency. For a 3-year-old, it's got some lovely fruit as well underneath all of that. It's actually pretty damn good, I think. Yeah, why not? I mean, this is good. This is good whiskey. It's got a robustness. It's sort of got a lovely fruitiness to it, to the spirit. It's not just one-dimensional. It's not just about the peat. And it has this lovely herbal, foresty, ferny sort of kind of character, which I think is really, really nice. Let's do it, pass on. Again, meaty, herbal. I'm getting sage and thyme and a little bit of boiled cabbage as well. Where the hell did that come from? Vanilla, dusty peat, herbal peat, lovely sweet barley underneath that, touch of oak. That's actually pretty rounded. For 3 years old, that actually has quite a bit of complexity, which is amazing the hell out of me, it has to be said, given that some of these other whiskies are a little bit older and taste a lot younger. This actually seems to taste more mature than its years, which is actually really quite good. So it certainly seems that these guys, the computer scientists can obviously sort of, make whiskey at the end of the day, which is really cool. And yeah, I like that. That's good. I mean, maybe this is it. Maybe Slovenia is the next powerhouse country of whiskey. If that's the case, you heard it here first. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Ordinarily, when I sum up an episode of the show, I start by thanking the distillery or the distributor or rep or whoever for sending me the samples for today's episode of the show. I don't know whether any of these particular distilleries are going to thank me for this review, but there you go. Like as you well know, I always try and give you a kind of an honest appraisal. It's at the end of the day, it's my personal opinion, and doesn't necessarily mean that if you taste any of these particular whiskies, you would come to the same conclusion. But overall, I like the fact that we have a weird world of whiskey at the end of the day. It's not just about Scotland or Great Britain or whatever. There are countries that are making really interesting spirits across the world, and some of them you've probably never heard of, and certainly I've never heard of, but they all have their merits at the end of the day. And I thought that the Il Signor Camillo's Moonshine was was pretty good for moonshine at the end of the day. I can see why it was best Italian new make. You know, and no, joking aside, you know, the quality of the spirit's pretty good. You know, I'm not going to denigrate any of these distilleries' works because they've obviously put their heart and soul and their passion into making the products. And I thought, like I said, I thought the moonshine was pretty good for what it was. You have to accept that's what it is. It's, you know, corn new make. It's not going to be hugely complex, but it was pleasant and it was different enough from, you know, American corn new make to just to have a viable sort of place, I think. The Stygge Krumpen A and B, well, you know, I think like I said, it falls into the sort of like the sort of pitfall, I suppose, of so many European whiskies, just bottled too soon. I thought it was interesting. Like I said, it's a mythical beast. This one doesn't seem to actually exist or any information about it. And like I said, it's possible, it's more than likely probable these were different terroir whiskies, these were from different islands, but at the end of the day they had a kind of very similarity or sameness, although there was sort of like, you know, the B was a bit more intense, and to me was, I think, more about cut points personally than actually where it came from. So, but you know, still an interesting kind of concept. Please just leave it in the cask for a little bit longer. The tier whiskey, again, you know, not bad spirit, difficult to say really. I didn't really taste an awful lot of spirit character. It was all about the cask, and there was some compromised sulphur notes from the cask as well, which didn't really kind of help things, which is a bit of a shame. But you know, like I said, you know, I think sort of certainly a distillery that's worth keeping an eye on. The Bivrost from Aurora Spirits, yeah, nice, young, interesting, intense, earthy, natural, a little bit of sheep poo, which, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you want from these kind of, you know, Danish, you know, Scandinavian distilleries. You want a bit of weirdness, you want a bit of sheep shit, you know. It's kind of like, it kind of goes with the territory to a certain extent, and it's not as sheep pooey as some, but there was an element there, and I kind of quite liked it, it has to be said. And to be honest with you, I think Whiskey of the Afternoon was the Broken Bones. That was a lovely spirit. I mean, irrespective of the peat angle, and it had a lovely meatiness to it, which I really appreciated. I thought that the quality of the spirit was pretty good. It had a fleshiness, had a fruitiness. It was not one-dimensional. It was not all about the peat. And it just goes to show that it doesn't really matter where your distillery is based. It's all about the principles of a good wort, a good fermentation, good distilling practices, clean casks, you know, and tailoring your spirit to sort of bottling it when you want to bottle it at the end of the day. And I thought that worked really well for you know, considering it was only a 3-year-old. So yeah, there you have it. That's this week's episode, The Show in the Bag. There probably won't be an episode next week, because next week or next Saturday I will be at the Nottingham Wine Festival. So if you're into your wines and you haven't bought a ticket and you live locally and you want to turn up, it's always a good show. There's always a lot of producers and distributors and shops and what have you showing their sort of stuff at St Mary's Church, and it just kills me, you know, sort of drinking alcohol in a big church. It just, you know, I don't. Well, why not? You know, it's a great venue. It's always fun, and like I said, I'll be there with you know, with my employer Gauntlet. I'll be showing some of the wines that we stock, and I can tell you there's going to be some bloody good ones. So if you haven't bought your ticket, just do a web search for Nottingham Wine Festival, and if there's tickets available, which there may well not be at this kind of late date, it will be excellent to see you. Anyway. Until next time, maybe, I don't know what I'll be doing next time. I haven't thought that kind of far ahead. But anyway, I'll dig something out anyway, and it will be fun. So until next time, go find yourself some weird Scandinavian whiskey.